Escaped prisoners, high-flying adventure, and law enforcement on a mission. We're not talking about Con Air. This is The Lawbreakers. Lawbreakers is a 2017 first-person online multiplayer shooter developed and published by Boss Key Productions. Boss Key Productions was the studio founded by Cliff Bleszinski. Love him or dislike him, Cliffy B is a game design genius. This is the guy who came up with Unreal, Unreal Tournament, Gears of War, and Bulletstorm. As a shooter fan, I of course played and enjoyed every single one of the games I just mentioned. I think Cliff Bleszinski is a pretty misunderstood guy. He is confident, he can be a little bit cocky, but he knows his stuff. He's an original thinker, he's an innovator, and with Lawbreakers, he and his studio was trying to do something different with the hero shooter genre. And that, of course, was to combine it with the fast-paced twitch mechanics of an action-packed arena shooter. The thing I liked about Boss Key Productions is the fact that they were a very small team, but they were very dedicated. They had big budget skills and aspirations, and they really tried to keep the gamers in mind because they were gamers themselves. And that's why they were trying to come out with high-quality AAA level games, but at an indie AA studio level. Not only were they on their way to doing that, they were also doing it while keeping gamers' wallets and their wants and desires in mind, which I think is pretty admirable. Now, when Lawbreakers was first announced, I was pretty excited, and the fact that they said it was going to be free to play, I thought was even cooler. And as we've seen, free-to-play games can be very successful, especially when the developers are open and honest with their fan base. They really try to connect with them, and they take what they have to say in mind, and they make those improvements that the gamers or the players are asking for. But of course, later on in development, they changed it to a game that you had to pay for, and it was for $30. Now, if you lived overseas, like myself here in Qatar, you had to pay $40. I really had high hopes for Cliff Bleszinski, for Boss Key Productions, and for Lawbreakers itself, and that was why I went into that PlayStation store, dropped that $40 on that pre-order, and waited for the game to come out. I actually broke my rule of no pre-ordering. When the beta came out, I did download it, I did play it. I liked it, I thought it was pretty good. I thought there were some things that they can improve upon, and I figured they would when the game was finally released a few weeks later. And with all the things that the Boss Key Productions team was saying, and of course that Cliff Bleszinski was saying, I really thought that was going to happen. After all, during the big marketing blitz for this game, Cliff Bleszinski infamously said this was going to be his next billion-dollar franchise. And that very well could have been possible. I'm going to discuss the things that I liked about the game, the things that I didn't like about the game, and why I think it failed. And at the end of this, I'm also going to talk about why Boss Key Productions went out of business, where they went wrong. And I'm not trying to throw digs at them here. I'm not trying to kick a dead horse because some people have talked about this, but a lot of the people that I've seen talk about this, I think they were talking about it just for the views. I'm going to talk about it because I really liked the game. To me, Cliffy B and Boss Key had the right idea. They were keeping gamers, they were keeping budgets, they were keeping all this important stuff that gamers and studios should care about in mind. So as you guys know, when I talk about games, I talk about the good, the bad, then I give it a score. So let's get into the good. So in Lawbreakers, you have two teams of 5 players. One side is the law and one side is the breaker, so basically the good guys versus the bad guys. There are 9 different roles. Each team basically has the same character. They just change the way they look, the way they sound, but there's no difference really between the gameplay. The game takes place in a rebuilt future America after a global seismic event known as the Shattering twisted the landscape and gravity itself. There are 8 different maps with a mobile-like structure. You have the main path down the center, then you have a path down the left side and the right side. Along the different routes, there are healing stations where you can top up before you make that final push. There are 5 different game modes. First, you have Occupy. Occupy has you capturing and defending zones that change every 45 seconds to different locations around the map. The first team to 200 points is the winner. Then there's Uplink. This is where you grab a centrally located data module, bring it back to your base and defend it till it fills up. The thing is, it holds the charge, so if the team comes in at the last second, steals it and brings it back to their base and it was filled up, they are the ones who win. Then there's Blitzball, which was my favorite, where you grab a centrally located ball, which is hilariously voiced by Justin Rowland, aka Morty, and bring it to the enemy base to score. It takes 8 points to win, and overtime is done with sudden death. There's Turf War, where you capture 3 different points that lock until the next round. There's short intermissions between the rounds, and it's 16 points to win. It's a really fun, fast, intense mode. Lastly, there's Overcharge, where you grab a centrally located battery, bring it back to your base, and defend it until it's charged. The first to 3 points wins. Of all the things that I liked about Lawbreakers, gunplay was definitely the top. The gunplay on here is super smooth, it's fast, it's violent, it's visceral. There was really nothing like it on the market. I had a great time shooting at people getting shot at and trying to find ways to outsmart them and find better angles on them during those battles. And to that end, you had the movement system. The movement system in this game was fantastic. And that's just in the normal movement when you're running around the map and doing all that kind of stuff. That's not even counting the 0G portions of the map. So there's different portions of the map where there is no gravity. So when you run out to one of those 0G areas, you basically can fly around and shoot people from the air. It's really cool, it's really interesting, and it was what really set the game apart. And when you shot somebody in the 0G area and watched them explode, it looked fantastic. It was really cool. It was really fun. The music in the game was really good too. You had a wide variety of styles that added to the atmosphere of the game, whether it was the menus or the summary screens or when you were customizing your characters. It was really nice background music. The sound design of the game was really fantastic as well. All the different characters had their own voice acting. The sound effects for the guns, the explosions, the ambient sounds within the levels, everything was top notch. You can tell they really spent a long time thinking about the sound in this game. The graphics were actually really great too, especially within the levels. They really put a lot of polish into the game. Even though it was a AA title or whatever you want to call it, a budget title, it didn't look like it, it didn't feel like it. This is one of those games that's really easy to learn and even harder to master. It really reminded me of like a fighting game, kind of like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. The player who actually put the time in and really got good at their class was the one who would almost always win during a fight. Even with the movements, you know, if you got used to how your player moved and the mechanics, whether it was the grappling hook or the rocket pack or whatever, you can find really creative routes through the map that people wouldn't expect, and that really put you in the upper hand, whether it was moving the ball to win or getting a surprise kill. Even cooler was the fact that everything that they were going to release for the game in the future was free content, whether it was characters or maps or play modes, whatever. Everything was free if you bought the game. So now that I've talked about the Lawbreaker goodness, let's get into the Lawbreaker badness. The whole skill-based combat thing was a double-edged sword, so maybe somebody wants to jump in and play and have a good time and they don't have a lot of time to play this game. They're definitely going to get their butt whooped by all these people who are always playing the game. So if you really liked hardcore Twitch shooters, you would love this game. If you didn't, you're probably not going to like it. Speaking of the classes, there was no limit to how many of a certain character you could pick in a level, and some of these levels really catered to the different characters. So you'd play in a match against 4 of the same player, and that got really boring really fast, and it was really frustrating. When the game launched, there were no tutorials. They eventually put out these different videos that you could watch that taught you about the game, and that helped. Other than that initial story about the shattering and, you know, the earth being messed up, there was no lore or stories or anything. So if you look at a game like Overwatch, which this was compared to all the time, that has so much lore and so many backstories and little videos, it really makes you feel like you're part of that world, where this game, it didn't have it, and it was basically just a game you were playing. You didn't feel like you were part of that world. The thing that always turned me off most about this game was there were no ranged heroes at all. Okay, so I know that you want this game to be up close and personal with like tons of fast, frantic combat. That's just not my playstyle on this type of game. I like to be a ranged hero. Now, they did have the sharpshooter guy with the 2 pistols, and people were sniping with it, but that was super skill-based. So if you weren't really, really good at that character, you were SOL. There is one support player who was the medic, and they really didn't matter much. The healing wasn't very good, and the players definitely didn't appreciate it. I played it a lot because of the weapons, and I do like to help the team, but it definitely wasn't worth it in the long run. The balance of the game for the weapons and the different character roles and everything, it was a mess, and it stayed that way until I stopped playing it. You know, you would use a rocket launcher and shoot somebody like 3 times and they wouldn't die, but then the gunslinger or the assassin comes up and they hit you with a 1 shot and you just disintegrate. So you're telling me somebody can run up to me, stab me with a knife, and my body's gonna explode, but I shoot them with 3 rockets and they don't die? While a lot of the levels were aesthetically pleasing, I liked the way they looked, they felt kind of dull and closed in, you know, especially, again, if you're not into just being in that close quarters battles all the time, then it's definitely not your thing. There was no voice chat at all in the game, whether it was during the beta, at launch, or even at the 4-month mark where I just stopped playing it completely. which is pretty unforgivable considering that it's a team-based game. So how are you supposed to coordinate with your team and, do these final pushes or anything, or tell someone, hey, that this bad guy's coming from the right or whatever, when there's no voice chat? That was one of the dumbest decisions that they made, and they definitely shouldn't have launched if it wasn't ready. You'd have this super low player count, so the matchmaking would take forever, sometimes 20, 30, 45 minutes. The developers, as much as I liked Boss Key, when it came to this game and, trying to talk to them about issues or report them or get feedback or anything, they didn't communicate at all. They really sucked at support. They really sucked at talking to the players. Outside of the developer updates, which they did once in a while, you didn't hear anything from them, even if what you had to say was constructive. And even though it was a hero shooter, it was really an arena shooter. And if you don't like arena shooters like Quake or whatever, you definitely would not like this game. Something I really didn't like about the game as well was the fact that people would play it and they would treat it like a deathmatch. Even though you were playing a team-based game, they'd be nowhere to be found. So you'd be defending in the objective and they're off just doing team deathmatch. So they should have made a deathmatch or a team deathmatch. And I think they did later on after I stopped playing, but I think it was way too late. And they really lost a lot of players because of this. This game was for sure made for the PC crowd because playing it with a controller was really inaccurate. While there were 5 modes, they were really repetitive. They were basically the same thing over and over. Take this thing, bring it to this place, and you get points. And that was it, over and over. There were no escort modes. There was nothing like that. They definitely needed to add more classes. They added one class. They definitely needed to add more classes. I think they only added one class after they launched, and that was it before the game died. They also needed more maps. I think they added one more map, and then again, the game died. They should have put out a lot more content at the start to get people hooked and to get new players on board. Now, one thing that they tried to do, which I admire about this game, is they tried to make it for grown-ups. They made it mature, they made it edgy, but the thing is, they made it so edgy that it almost had a generic feel. All the character models kind of looked the same without, a few little differences, but from a distance, it was really hard to tell who was who. All over the maps, there were locked doors and invisible boundaries, which when, you're playing a game that's supposed to be all about freedom of movement, can really stifle the player and really bring them down. There are a lot of things that you could customize on your player, and you got a lot of stuff in the loot boxes. Most of it was shit. Really stuff that you didn't care about, especially the boot prints. The boot prints all looked pretty much the same. They were really generic. Then you would get these stickers, and the stickers were so small they barely showed, so it wasn't like exciting. You're not like, oh, I got a new boot print or a new sticker. You really didn't care. It was so rare to get skins for the players or the weapons, at least good ones. You would get these really generic ones. When you're playing these types of games, you want to get skins for your player. You want weapon skins. You want to look different. You want to stand out. That's one of the draws to these games. That's one of the highlights. And that wasn't helped by the in-game economy, which was really stingy. It took forever to get credits. It was really frustrating. So they were really just trying to force you to buy stash boxes, which was their version of loot boxes. And that would be fine if this had been a free-to-play game, but I paid $40. If I paid $40 for a game, especially a multiplayer only game, I shouldn't have to grind this much to get unlocks for my characters. They really relied too much on the hardcore player base for this game. And when you look at games like Fortnite and Apex Legends, you can understand why, because when you have such easy access for casual players who don't really care about the game, they're not really trying to get better, it can bring down your experience. Still though, you should try to make the game somewhat accessible to new players or to players who don't have that time to put in like a lot of these other ones to get really good. All the way up until I stopped playing, you would see lag in the game, even if you had a good connection. And there was also these frame hitches that you would get, almost like when you edit a video at different frame rates and you get frame tearing. It would look like that, and that was really ugly and it was really frustrating. Now, Boss Key had the right idea. They were trying to make, mature, edgy characters that you connected to. And, you might, to a certain level, if you got really good at that character. As good as the voice acting was, it got really old because all of the characters said the same shit over and over and over. You always heard the same stuff constantly. I think if they had just taken the time to add a few more modes like escort missions or different PvE modes, people would have stayed more involved. They would have kept playing. I think the player base would have built up. But for me, I just ended up deleting the game because I felt like it was just taking up storage on my PS4, and I just wasn't feeling it anymore. And it didn't help that when you're playing the game, there's no voice chat, so you basically feel like you're just playing with a bunch of bots. If I play a team game, I want to feel like part of a team, not like I'm by myself. So that's what I thought about Lawbreakers, both the good and the bad. I thought it was a pretty good game. It could have been a great game if they had waited a little bit longer to launch it, if they had done a little bit more stuff to improve it, all those things that I talked about. Ultimately, I think there are 4 main reasons this game and Boss Key Productions failed. 1, again, not doing their own thing, not doing something completely original, out of the blue, something that people don't expect. Something like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice that Ninja Theory did. If they had taken this amazing team, come up with their own unique IP. Yes, Lawbreakers was its own unique IP, but it was from a stale hero shooter genre that many people were tired of. The second thing that killed this game is the lack of improvement upon its release. Yes, they did do some updates, they did do some bug fixes, they did listen to the players and do a lot of changes. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough and it wasn't fast enough. And releasing the beta just a few weeks before the game came out was not a good idea. They should have released it well before that, got the player feedback, and then improved upon it, and maybe done one more final beta before it launched, maybe a week or two, to find out if they'd hit the nail on the head, and then release it. As Cliffy B famously said himself, they're not going to do some kind of beta that comes out right before the game, because that's clearly not to fix bugs, that is for marketing purposes, and that's what they did, and it screwed them. Now, had they continued supporting the game and made more improvements, I think it would have gotten stronger and stronger. After all, if you look at a lot of the Ubisoft games from last year or the year before that, their launches were not strong, but because they kept that support up, they kept putting out new content. Games like Rainbow Six Siege, Ghost Recon Wildlands, and For Honor are stronger than ever. But again, the team at Ubisoft kept at it. They put out new patches, new content. They were getting more and more player feedback. So not only were they holding on to the older players who wanted to see these improvements, they were bringing in new players. They kept doing free-to-play weekends and stuff like that, which helped the game grow. And that brings me to the third reason that Lawbreakers and Boss Key Productions failed. They charged money for the game after announcing that it was going to be free-to-play. I'm not saying that they couldn't make money and shouldn't make money. Of course they need to make money. The people who work there need to eat. They need to be able to pay rent, all that kind of stuff. If they had made the game free to play and made the content in the game, the unlockables and the progression much more interesting, people would have kept coming back and they would have made a lot of money from those things like Fortnite and stuff has. Even the people who had paid for the game were saying, guys, make the game free to play or at least do some free weekends to get more players to come in. But off the top of my head, I can only think of 2 times they did a free weekend. So they really dropped the ball there. There wasn't enough content in this game for the price that people were paying. Now I'm going to talk about the fourth reason that Boss Key Productions and Lawbreakers failed, and that was because of the game that they released in Extreme Early Access. That's what they called it, Extreme Early Access. And that game is Radical Heights. Just another battle royale game that was in an already crowded genre. While they did try to do something different with it, they had BMX bikes, it had like this really cool 80s, game show Smash TV-like theme. There wasn't enough content there, it was just not ready. And they launched it. That, of course, was a dumb decision. Yes, Battle Royale was the hot ticket. Everybody wanted to play Battle Royale games. And, of course, they launched it for free. So for the initial release, there was a decent amount of players. But once they jumped in this game and saw how bare bones it was and how much stuff that it was lacking, they didn't come back. And that includes myself. So with Radical Heights, they really screwed themselves. It was just another example that Boss Key Productions was just going to keep fucking up. This was the second game they launched, and this was the second game that was not an original idea. You had a hero shooter, you had a battle royale game, both genres that people were tired of by that point. So there you go, that's why Lawbreakers and why Boss Key Productions eventually failed. I didn't want them to. I seriously did not want them to. I was rooting for them hardcore. I love good, strong, smaller studios that are trying to do things, that are trying to keep players in mind, that are trying to do something that other studios aren't. They're looking at what the AAA industry is doing, seeing these shitty practices and how they're pushing the player aside just to make money, and these guys tried to do something different. But at the same time, they really didn't do anything different, and that was the problem. That being said, I know you're tired of hearing me talk, so drum roll please. 6 out of 10.